Darius Vale hadn't truly closed his eyes in 400 years, but tonight, on the 52nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, he decided to pretend. The city stretched beneath him like a field of fallen stars, yellow cabs crawling along wet streets, sirens wailing somewhere far below, and inside his corner office the lights were dimmed just enough to cast long shadows across the marble floor. He sat slumped in his leather chair, tie loosened, head tilted slightly to the side, breathing slow and measured like any overworked CEO after a 16-hour board meeting. It was a performance, precise and deliberate. For 2 weeks, small items had disappeared from the executive level. A Mont-Blanc pen, a silver letter opener, petty cash from an unlocked drawer. Human greed, predictable and dull. Darius could have compelled the truth from every employee with a single glance. But centuries ago he had sworn he would never strip a human of their will unless absolutely necessary. If someone was stealing, he wanted to see it with his own eyes. At 11:48 p.m., the soft beep of a keycard echoed through the quiet office suite. His supernatural hearing caught every detail. The faint squeak of rubber soles on polished stone, the subtle rattle of a janitor's cart, the slight hitch in someone's breath upon noticing him in the chair. Clara Bennett froze just inside the doorway. She hadn't expected the CEO to still be there. The man was known for working impossible hours, but even she assumed he went home at some point. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at him, studying the rise and fall of his chest. "Sir?" she whispered gently. No response. Darius remained perfectly still, aware of the faint scent of lemon cleaner and something softer, lavender soap, inexpensive but clean. Clara hesitated before pushing her cart farther in. She was 29, with tired hazel eyes and dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. A single mother with a 5-year-old son asleep across town at her mother's apartment. She worked nights because it paid $2 more per hour. $2 meant milk, meant rent, meant survival. She began dusting the bookshelves, movements quiet and careful. Darius waited. On his desk, an open drawer revealed an envelope stuffed with cash. His platinum watch rested beside it, glinting under recessed lighting. A perfect temptation. Clara eventually stepped closer to the desk. Her hand hovered over the drawer. Darius felt every microsecond stretch thin as glass. She lifted the envelope slightly, peeking inside at the crisp $100 bills. He counted the beats between her breaths. Then, slowly, she set it back exactly where it had been. From her own pocket, she pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and slid it under the envelope. "For the coffee you forgot to pay for downstairs," she murmured softly, remembering the flustered assistant earlier that week. Darius's control tightened like steel cables. This was not the reaction he expected. Clara closed the drawer and turned her attention back to cleaning. 10 minutes passed. She emptied the trash, wiped the conference table, adjusted a crooked framed photograph on the wall. When she approached his chair again, she paused. Up close, he looked pale, almost fragile under the artificial light. She noticed the faint tension in his brow, the stiffness in his shoulders. Exhaustion, she assumed. Without thinking, she slipped off her worn beige cardigan and draped it carefully over him. The fabric smelled faintly of detergent and home. She leaned closer, voice barely more than breath. "You don't have to carry the whole world alone." The words were simple, human, kind. But inside Darius Vale, something ancient and carefully buried cracked open for the first time in centuries. For a fraction of a second after she whispered those words, the air in the office shifted, subtle but undeniable, as if the building itself had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe out. Darius did not move, yet inside him something long dormant stirred awake. His heart, a relic that had not required rhythm in centuries, gave a single heavy pulse against his ribs. He had heard those exact words once before, spoken in a candlelit study in 1812, when war rumors pressed against the windows and the woman he loved had placed her shawl over his shoulders with the same quiet gentleness. "You do not have to carry the whole world alone." Clara stepped back, unaware that she had just reopened a wound time had failed to close. She adjusted the cardigan around him as if he were only a tired man and not something ancient and immeasurable. Her fingers lingered for half a second at the collar to make sure the fabric rested evenly. Then she turned toward her cart. Darius opened his eyes the moment her back faced him. The city lights reflected crimson for an instant before fading to their usual gray. He watched her in silence, studying the small details he had missed before. The careful way she organized the cleaning supplies. The faint crease between her brows when she calculated how long each task would take. The way she paused to straighten a stack of files that no one else would notice. There was no calculation in her movements. No hunger. No fear. Only quiet responsibility. Clara returned to the desk once more to wipe a faint ring left by a coffee cup. She noticed the drawer slightly ajar and nudged it closed without looking inside again. Her $5 bill remained hidden beneath the envelope. She did not expect gratitude. She did not expect recognition. When she finally guided her cart toward the door, she hesitated and glanced back at him. For a moment her expression softened, not with ambition, not with longing, but with simple human concern. She switched off the lamp near the window to save electricity. The click echoed. The office darkened except for the city glow. The door closed with a gentle hush. Darius remained still for 3 seconds more. Then he rose. The cardigan slid from his shoulders into his hands. He lifted it slowly, as though it were something fragile and irreplaceable. The scent of lavender lingered in the fibers. Ordinary detergent. Ordinary life. Extraordinary effect. He walked to the window, looking down 52 floors at the grid of Manhattan streets. 400 years of empires rising and collapsing had not shaken him the way a whisper just had. He replayed her voice perfectly in his mind, tone and breath and cadence preserved with supernatural clarity. There had been no manipulation in it, no awareness of who he truly was. Only kindness offered without expectation. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in recognition. This was not coincidence. He no longer believed in coincidence. He crossed the office in a single silent stride and pressed a button on his desk phone. When his head of human resources answered, groggy and confused at the late hour, Darius spoke evenly. I need the full file on Clara Bennett. Employment history, family records, everything. And make sure she is not disturbed. There was a pause on the other end. Yes, sir. Darius ended the call and looked once more at the cardigan in his hands. Somewhere in the building, Clara Bennett was taking the elevator down, thinking only about catching the last bus home. She had no idea that tonight she had not been tested. She had awakened something far older than this city, something that had sworn never to hope again. Clara Bennett stepped out of the subway station in Queens just after 1:15 in the morning, the February air sharp against her cheeks as she pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, already missing the warmth of the cardigan she had left behind. The streets were quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the flicker of a corner deli sign struggling to stay lit. She checked her phone for the time and for a message from her mother, exhaling in relief when she saw a simple text that read, "He is asleep." She walked the remaining 3 blocks to the small brick apartment building where her son waited, her shoes scuffing softly against the sidewalk, her mind replaying the image of the exhausted man in the leather chair. She did not know why she had whispered those words. They had simply felt necessary. Across the river, 52 floors above Manhattan, Darius Vale stood in front of a wall of security monitors, his expression unreadable as footage from the past hour replayed in precise detail. He had enhanced the audio until every breath Clara had taken filled the room. He watched the moment her hand hovered over the open drawer. He watched her place $5 of her own money beneath the envelope. He watched her remove the cardigan from her shoulders and drape it over him with quiet care. There was no hesitation in her kindness, no calculation. He paused the frame at the exact second she leaned close enough for her whisper to brush his ear. The memory layered over another from 2 centuries ago, candlelight and parchment and the scent of ink and rain. He shut off the monitor abruptly. Enough. Facts were required, not ghosts. His phone vibrated on the desk. An encrypted message from his head of human resources appeared with a digital file attached. Clara Bennett, age 29, divorced. 1 son, Ethan, age 5. Night janitor at Vale Corporation for 8 months. No criminal record. No outstanding debt beyond standard medical bills and a modest car. Loan. Part-time server on weekends in Astoria. Income barely above minimum wage. He read every line twice. There was nothing extraordinary in the data. No hidden affiliations. No suspicious transfers. Just a woman holding together a fragile life with stubborn determination. He leaned back in his chair, and considered the deeper question that had begun to form. How had she known the exact words that could fracture centuries of restraint? He opened a separate database, one far older than any corporate file, containing records that predated the United States itself. He searched for her family name, tracing it backward through immigration documents, census archives, and faded church registries. Generations unfolded across the screen in black and white entries. Bennett. Before that, Benoit. Before that, a different spelling entirely in a language no longer commonly spoken. His gaze sharpened. A single name surfaced in an 18th-century parish record. A midwife who had once lived in a coastal town not far from where he had hidden during a brutal winter long ago. The connection was thin, almost invisible, but not impossible. Darius rose and moved toward the window once more, the cardigan still folded neatly on his desk. Somewhere in Queens, Clara was likely checking on her sleeping son, brushing hair from his forehead the way any devoted mother would. She believed tonight had been ordinary. He knew it had not. For the first time in 400 years, Darius Vale felt anticipation that did not taste like strategy or conquest, but something far more dangerous. Hope, fragile and luminous, threading itself quietly through the ruins of an immortal heart. By 7:30 the next evening, Clara Bennett was back on the 52nd floor with a fresh set of cleaning supplies and a quiet determination to finish early so she could catch the 9:15 bus home. She had borrowed a thin gray sweater from her mother to replace the cardigan she had left behind, though she had not told anyone why it was missing. To her, it had been a small sacrifice. To Darius Vale, it had become something else entirely. He had not left the building that day. Board meetings had been shortened. Calls had been delegated. For the first time in decades, his attention was not on acquisitions or global markets, but on the soft echo of a whisper that refused to fade. He stood by the window when he heard the faint roll of her cart outside his office again. This time, he did not pretend to sleep. He sat upright behind his desk, hands folded, eyes steady as the keycard beeped and the door opened. Clara stepped inside and stopped abruptly when she saw him awake. Color rose faintly in her cheeks. "I am sorry, sir," she said quickly. "I did not mean to disturb you last night. I thought you had gone home." Darius studied her carefully, noting the absence of the beige cardigan and the way her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cart. "You left something behind," he said evenly. He reached into a drawer and placed the folded cardigan on the desk between them. Clara's eyes widened with surprise. "You kept it?" "I should not have done that," she added softly. "It was not professional." "You believed I was tired," Darius replied. "That is not unprofessional. That is observant." She hesitated, unsure whether this was a reprimand or something else entirely. "I just thought everyone deserves a little kindness," she answered. "Even people who seem like they have everything." The words settled in the room with quiet weight. Everything. Darius had amassed fortunes, built corporations, and watched centuries unfold. Yet the simplicity of her statement unsettled him more than any hostile takeover. He rose slowly from his chair and moved around the desk, stopping a respectful distance away. "You placed $5 in my drawer," he continued. "Why?" Clara blinked, clearly startled that he had noticed. "Because the assistant downstairs paid for your coffee last week when you were in a hurry," she explained. "I saw it. It did not feel right to leave it that way." "You assumed I would not notice the missing money," Darius said. "I assumed it was not about being noticed," she replied. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken. Darius felt the familiar instinct to search her thoughts, to peel back the layers of her mind and confirm what his instincts already suggested. He resisted. He had sworn long ago that free will mattered. Instead, he asked the only question that lingered beneath the surface. "Where did you learn to say that?" Clara tilted her head slightly. "Say what?" "The words you whispered last night," he clarified, his voice quieter now. "You do not have to carry the whole world alone." Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by something softer. "My grandmother used to say that to my grandfather when he worked double shifts at the docks," she said. "She told me real strength is not about carrying everything yourself. It is about letting someone help." The air in the office felt different again, not colder, not warmer, just altered. Darius looked at her, as if seeing beyond the fluorescent lights and polished floors, beyond the present moment. Generations. Echoes. Patterns that refused to remain buried. Clara shifted slightly under his gaze. Is something wrong, sir? For the first time in 4 centuries, Darius Vale answered with complete honesty. No, he said quietly. Something is finally right. Clara did not fully understand why his final words unsettled her more than any sharp criticism could have. Something is finally right. The sentence lingered in the quiet office long after it was spoken. She shifted her weight and offered a small, polite smile, unsure how to respond to a statement that sounded less like business and more like confession. I am glad to hear that, sir, she said gently, then reached for her cart. I should finish before midnight. Darius watched her move through the room again, but this time nothing about her presence felt like background noise. Every motion registered. The steady rhythm of her steps. The careful way she avoided disrupting documents stacked in exact alignment. The way she paused at the window for a second, looking down at the river lights as if measuring the distance between this tower and her own life. You have a son, he said quietly. Clara glanced back, surprised. Yes, Ethan. He is 5. He likes dinosaurs and refuses to eat vegetables unless they are shaped like stars. A faint warmth entered her voice when she spoke about him, effortless and unguarded. Darius absorbed the detail as if it were rare currency. 5 years old. Small hands. Uncomplicated trust. He had once known what it meant to hold something that fragile. Does he know where you work? Darius asked. He knows I clean offices, she answered. I tell him I help keep big places running. He thinks that is important. It is, Darius replied without hesitation. Clara studied him carefully, sensing that this conversation had drifted far from corporate hierarchy. Most people in your position do not ask about night staff children. She said lightly. Most people in my position do not notice when $5 appears in a drawer, he returned. A flicker of amusement passed between them, brief but genuine. The distance between employer and employee thinned, not erased, but altered. Darius moved back toward his desk and opened a folder that had arrived that afternoon. I am creating a scholarship fund for employees with children, he said, his tone steady but intentional. Tuition assistance. Health coverage. Flexible hours where possible. It will begin next month. Clara's brow furrowed slightly. That sounds generous, she said. It sounds necessary, he corrected. She hesitated. Why now? Darius held her gaze. Because strength should not mean carrying everything alone. The echo of her grandmother's wisdom returned, reframed in his voice. Clara looked down for a moment, processing the weight of what he was offering, not just to her, but to dozens of families she knew by name. That will change lives, she said softly. Including yours, he added, though the words carried more layers than she could see. A silence followed, not fragile this time, but steady. Clara finished wiping the last surface and gathered her supplies. Thank you for returning my sweater, she said as she reached for the cardigan on the desk. Keep it, Darius replied. For now. She paused, confused. Why? Because I would like you to have something new tomorrow, he answered. Something warmer. Something chosen, not worn thin by necessity. Clara opened her mouth to protest, pride rising instinctively, but something in his expression stopped her. It was not pity. It was resolve. She nodded slowly. Good night, Mr. Vale. Good night, Clara, he said, using her name without distance. When the door closed behind her, Darius stood alone once more, but the solitude felt different. Outside, Manhattan pulsed with restless energy. Inside, an immortal who had mastered empires found himself contemplating something far more unpredictable than markets or centuries. A future that might, for the first time, include someone who did not fear him, did not want his power, and had unknowingly reminded him that even ancient kings are not meant to stand alone. The next evening, the 52nd floor felt subtly different, as if the air itself carried anticipation. Clara stepped out of the elevator with a garment bag folded carefully over her arm, her mind still turning over the unexpected conversation from the night before. She had almost refused his offer, almost insisted that she did not need help, but when she arrived home and saw Ethan asleep under a faded blanket covered in cartoon rockets, pride had softened into practicality. Opportunity did not come often. Not like this. Inside his office, Darius stood near the window again, watching the river reflect the city lights like scattered silver. He sensed her arrival before the keycard beeped. Her heartbeat was steady, human, warm. It grounded him in ways he had not anticipated. When she entered, she paused for a moment, uncertain. Good evening, Mr. Vale, she said. He turned slowly. Good evening, Clara. His gaze shifted briefly to the garment bag in her hands. She followed his eyes and offered a small explanation. My mother insisted I try it on before bringing it back. I wanted to make sure it was appropriate. There was hesitation in her voice, but also a quiet strength. She stepped into the adjoining conference room for privacy and emerged minutes later wearing a simple navy coat, tailored but modest, warm enough for New York winters without being extravagant. It fit her perfectly, as though chosen with care rather than impulse. Darius did not comment immediately. He simply observed the way she stood a little straighter, the way the fabric changed how she carried herself. You look prepared for the cold, he said at last. Clara smiled faintly. That is more than I have felt in a long time. Silence followed, not awkward, but reflective. Darius moved closer, maintaining a respectful distance. Tomorrow there will be an announcement about the scholarship fund, he said. It will be presented as a corporate initiative. Your name will not be mentioned. Clara nodded slowly. I do not need recognition. Ethan needs stability. That is enough. Her priorities were clear, unwavering. It stirred something protective inside him, something that had once belonged to a man rather than a king. Clara hesitated before speaking again. May I ask you something? You may. Why are you doing this, really? Not just the fund. All of it. His expression did not harden, but it grew deeper, older. Because I have spent centuries believing strength meant distance, he said. I was wrong. She studied him carefully, sensing layers beneath the calm exterior, layers he did not fully reveal. Everyone carries something heavy, she replied gently. The trick is knowing when to set it down. The words settled between them like truth neither could deny. Outside, the wind brushed against the glass, a low whisper against steel and concrete. Darius felt the pull of something unfamiliar, yet undeniable. He had ruled companies, influenced markets, commanded respect without effort. None of that required vulnerability. This did. Clara glanced at the clock. I should finish my rounds, she said softly. Ethan has a school project tomorrow. Dinosaurs again. He believes the Tyrannosaurus Rex would make an excellent mayor. A faint smile touched Darius's lips, rare and unguarded. Ambitious, he said. Very. When she turned to leave, he spoke once more. Clara. She looked back. You were right. About not carrying everything alone. For the first time in centuries, the admission cost him nothing. It felt lighter than silence. She held his gaze, steady and unafraid. Good, she said simply. Because even kings need help sometimes. The door closed gently behind her, and Darius stood in the quiet office, aware that something irreversible had begun. Not conquest, not strategy, something far more powerful. Choice. The announcement was made at 9:05 the next morning in the main auditorium, streamed to every department across the building, but Clara did not watch it live. She was asleep in her small apartment in Queens, the navy coat folded carefully over the back of a kitchen chair. Ethan's construction paper dinosaur project spread across the table beside a cup of cold coffee. At Vale Corporation, employees listened in stunned silence as Darius outlined the new family support initiative, tuition assistance, expanded health benefits, and flexible scheduling for parents. His voice was steady, measured, but those who knew him well sensed something had shifted. This was not a calculated public relations move. It was personal. By the time Clara arrived for her shift that evening, whispers had already traveled through every hallway. 2 other janitors stopped her near the supply closet, eyes wide with cautious excitement. Did you hear about the scholarship fund? It is real. It starts next month. Clara nodded slowly, pretending surprise, though her pulse quickened. Stability. The word echoed in her mind like a promise she had never allowed herself to imagine. When she reached the 52nd floor, the atmosphere felt charged. Assistants moved with renewed energy. Even the security staff seemed lighter. She pushed her cart toward Darius's office, uncertain whether tonight would feel different. It did. The door was open. He stood near the bookshelf, reviewing documents, but when he sensed her presence, he looked up immediately. You heard, he said simply. Yes, she answered. Thank you. The gratitude in her voice was not dramatic, but it was real. Darius stepped closer, not crossing the invisible boundary that had formed between them, but no longer hiding behind his desk either. This is only the beginning, he said. Clara studied him carefully. Of what? He paused, considering how much truth to reveal. of building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports, beyond profit margins, something that matters. She tilted her head slightly. You already built an empire. Empires fall, he replied quietly. What remains are the people protected inside them. The conviction in his voice was different tonight, less guarded. Clara felt it. She set aside her cleaning cloth and met his gaze directly. You are changing, she said. He did not deny it. Change is inevitable, he answered. The question is whether it is chosen. A brief silence settled between them. Outside the window, the city pulsed with life, headlights weaving through avenues like veins carrying light. Clara glanced at the skyline, then back at him. Ethan wants to visit the Natural History Museum this weekend, she said unexpectedly. He has never seen the dinosaur exhibit in person. Darius felt an unfamiliar warmth at the image. Then you should take him, he said. Clara hesitated, then surprised herself. Would you like to come? The invitation was simple, without expectation, offered as easily as kindness. For a man who had attended royal courts and private galas across centuries, the prospect of standing beside a 5-year-old staring at fossilized bones felt almost surreal. Yet it did not feel trivial. It felt honest. I would be honored, he said at last. Clara smiled, the kind of smile that did not calculate outcomes. Saturday at 10 in the morning. Do not be late. He almost laughed, a sound rare and unpracticed. I will not. As she returned to her work, Darius stood by the window once more, but the city no longer felt distant. For the first time in 400 years, he was not watching humanity from above. He was stepping into it, one choice at a time. Saturday morning arrived with a pale winter sun stretching across Central Park, the air crisp but clear, the kind of New York morning that felt sharp enough to wake even the oldest memories. Clara stood outside the grand stone entrance of the Natural History Museum at 9:58, Ethan's small gloved hand wrapped tightly around hers as he bounced with impatient excitement. He wore a bright blue jacket and a knit hat with tiny fabric spikes meant to resemble a dinosaur. Every few seconds he looked up at the towering banners hanging above the entrance, as if expecting a Tyrannosaurus Rex to step out and greet him personally. At exactly 10 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up along the curb. Darius stepped out, dressed simply in a charcoal overcoat and dark slacks, understated but unmistakably composed. He did not arrive with security or assistance. He arrived alone. Clara noticed the subtle restraint and understood it for what it was. Choice. Ethan studied him openly. You are the office boss, he declared without hesitation. Darius inclined his head slightly. I am. And you must be the dinosaur expert. Ethan grinned with immediate approval. I know 43 species by name. 44 if you count the one I made up. That is impressive, Darius replied with complete seriousness. They entered the museum together, the marble floors echoing softly beneath their steps. The vast fossil hall opened before them, skeletal giants suspended in frozen motion. Ethan's hand slipped free as he ran a few feet ahead, pointing upward in awe. That is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, he announced proudly. Darius followed his gaze. Massive ribs arched overhead, ancient bones preserved across millions of years. Creatures that once ruled the earth now reduced to quiet testimony. Time changes everything, he murmured, almost to himself. Clara glanced at him. Not everything, she said gently. Some things endure because someone chooses to remember them. He looked at her then, recognizing the layered meaning. Ethan tugged at Darius's coat sleeve. Do you think dinosaurs were lonely? He asked suddenly. The question caught both adults off guard. Darius crouched to meet the boy's eye level. I think even the strongest creatures needed others, he answered carefully. Strength does not mean being alone. Ethan considered that with solemn focus before nodding. That makes sense. Clara watched the exchange, something warm and steady unfolding in her chest. There was no performance here. No corporate distance. Only a man listening carefully to a child's question as if it mattered. They moved through the exhibits slowly. Ethan explained fossil displays with confident enthusiasm. Clara laughed more than she had in months. Darius observed, absorbing details he had long denied himself. The simplicity of shared time. The quiet dignity of ordinary joy. As they paused near a towering triceratops skeleton, Ethan slipped his small hand into Darius's without hesitation, instinctive and trusting. The contact was brief but profound. An immortal heart that had survived centuries felt something steady and human anchor it in the present moment. Clara noticed, but did not comment. She simply met Darius's eyes across the exhibit hall. In that look was understanding. Not of his full truth, not yet, but of something deeper. He was no longer watching life from a distance. He was standing inside it, choosing connection over isolation. And for the first time in 400 years, that choice did not feel like weakness. It felt like strength. The afternoon light filtered through the tall museum windows as they stepped back outside, Central Park stretching wide and winter pale beyond the stone steps. Ethan was still talking about fossils, about how some bones lasted millions of years while others turned to dust. Clara listened with patient affection, her hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder as he described the imaginary dinosaur he planned to invent one day. Darius walked beside them in thoughtful silence, the city noise no longer distant but woven into the rhythm of the moment. He had attended royal ceremonies in candlelit halls, signed treaties that reshaped borders, and watched skylines rise where forests once stood. Yet none of those memories felt as vivid as a small boy arguing passionately about whether a triceratops could outrun a storm. They paused near a park bench overlooking the trees. Ethan tugged at Clara's sleeve. "Can he come over for dinner sometime?" he asked openly, glancing at Darius with unfiltered hope. Clara blinked, caught off guard, but did not dismiss the idea. "That depends," she said carefully. "Does he eat vegetables shaped like stars?" Darius allowed himself a quiet smile. "I am willing to learn," he answered. Ethan nodded decisively, satisfied with the negotiation, and ran a few steps ahead to inspect a nearby squirrel. Clara exhaled softly once they were momentarily alone. "He does not invite people easily," she said. "That means something." "I understand," Darius replied, "and I do not take it lightly." The wind brushed against the trees, carrying the faint scent of cold earth and distant street vendors. Clara studied him in the natural light, noticing how still he stood even among the movement of the city. "You look different out here," she observed. "Less guarded." "Perhaps I am," he admitted. "For a long time, I believed distance was protection. It kept everything intact. And now," she prompted gently. "Now I see that distance can also be loss," he said. "Loss of moments that cannot be reclaimed." Clara absorbed that quietly. "You cannot protect yourself from life and expect to live it at the same time," she replied. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Ethan ran back toward them, breathless and bright. "Mom, look." He held up a small leaf shaped like a star, brittle but intact. Clara took it carefully, smiling at the coincidence. Darius watched the exchange, something steady settling deep within him. He had once measured time in centuries. Now he measured it in smaller units. A Saturday morning. A child's question. A woman who refused to see him as untouchable. As they walked toward the street, the city felt less like territory and more like possibility. Clara stopped before crossing, turning to him with quiet resolve. "I do not know where this leads," she said honestly. "Neither do I," Darius answered. "But I would like to find out." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic promise. Just mutual choice, spoken plainly. Ethan slipped his hand into Clara's and looked up at Darius expectantly. "Are you coming?" he asked. Darius met the boy's gaze and nodded once. "Yes, I am." And for the first time in 400 years, he stepped forward not as a ruler observing from above, but as a man willing to walk beside them, knowing that even the coldest kings are changed not by power, but by kindness.